Okay, so welcome back. It seems a long time since we have learned Gemarah for one reason or another. It actually is a month since we have had a Gemarah share. So we need to have a little bit of a recap of what we were doing. And what we were doing is going through the Mishnah, which was talking about the Kohen Gadol and the king, as to whether they can be judged, whether they can give testimony. And we spent some time at the end, towards the end of the last shiur, discussing the verse in Parashat Ki Teitzei, which talked about returning lost objects. Don't know if you remember that. And we came to the conclusion that there were times when you did not have to return a lost object. And it was all to do with a particular word. Let's have a look for background at the pasuk in Parashat Ki Teitzei. It's chapter 22 of Devarim. Let me share the screen with you. There we go. And Jeffrey, if you would read the first two psukim, really, I think.
You shall not see your brother's ox or sheep straying and ignore them. Rather, you shall return them to your brother. But if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, you shall bring it into your house, and it shall be with you until your brother seeks it out, whereupon you shall return it to him.
And one more, please, number 3 as well.
So shall you do with his donkey, and so shall you do with his garment, and so shall you do with any lost article of your brother, which he has lost, and you have found. You shall not ignore it. Okay,
so what we spoke about last time were these two words here. Vehitalamta, you shall literally hide yourself away. It's translated here as ignore it, and Jeffrey's read that out. But it means, literally, it means to hide yourself away. And then we have it again over here in the third pasuk, lo tochal lehitalem, you cannot hide yourself away from it. Meaning that if you see a lost object, you are not allowed to pretend you haven't seen it. You're not allowed to turn a blind eye and say, I'm not going to pick that up. But the fact that there are two expressions here, one in verse 1 and one in verse 3, needs some explanation. And what we did last time was to understand that the fact that there are two expressions here using the same word means that there are occasions when a person does not need to return that lost article, where he can, as it were, ignore it and walk away. Can anybody remember the basically two situations in which you can not return a lost article? Anyone? David, can you help us?
One was if the lost article is of such low value that the effort to procure it would be greater than its value itself.
Correct. That's a very simple example, correct? You have a person who earns 100 shekels an hour, and it's going to take him an hour to pick up this lost object and look after it, and this lost object's only worth 50 shekels. Well, he is entitled to compensation for his efforts. You don't have to do this for free. And so if the compensation that he would be entitled to is worth more than the value of the object, then clearly there's no point doing it, because the person's not going to thank you if you give him back an article worth 50 shekels and you say, right, well, now you owe me 100 shekels because that's that's what it's cost me to look after it for you. So that's one example. And there is another example where you don't have to do that, where you don't have to return the lost article. And that's the one which is relevant to our Mishnah, or that's our Brisa, actually. Can you remember what that is? Anyone remember what the second example was of where you don't have to return the article? David, help us out again. Can't remember?
Don't remember, Johnny.
Okay, when it is beneath the dignity of the person to do it. So if you have a Talmid Chacham, a big Rebbe, and there is a lost article, he's walking through the streets and he sees a lost article in the middle of a pile of dog poo. Okay, not unusual to find a pile of dog poo on the streets around here, unfortunately. You're working through the streets, a Talmid Chacham, it's beneath his dignity to go bending down and go searching through and go with his getting through this dog poo and pick up the lost article. Okay, if it is beneath the dignity of the person to do such a thing, then he is not obliged to do so. And it is that example that we use in our Gemara to understand what the Brisa says. Let me now take you to the Gemara. Can you see the Gemara on the screen, or do I need to start all over again with my share? Give me a thumbs up if you can see the Gemara. It's on page 104, Michael, in yours. Can you see it on the screen? Yeah, okay. So this is where we're up to. We're over here. Amar Rav Yosef. So what we said was that a Kohen Gadol can is not obliged, well, cannot give testimony. Why is a Kohen Gadol not allowed to give testimony? Because it's beneath his dignity. He's a Kohen Gadol. It's beneath his dignity. We apply the same principle that it's beneath his dignity to go to give testimony in a court of law. Okay, so if we just go back a few lines here to the top where the S was, the Mishnah says, "Me'id u'me'idin oto." The high priest can give testimony and can be testified against. Asks the Gemara, "Me'id." What, really? He can give testimony. V'hatanya, but we have learned in a Brisa, v'hitalamta, from our pasuk that we just did. Pe'amim she'ata mitalem. There are times when you are allowed to hide yourself away from returning a lost article. Pe'amim she'ata mitalem. And there are times when you are not allowed to. Haketzad, how does it work? Kohen, v'hu bebet hakvarot, a Kohen who is in a cemetery and he's walking in these permitted areas and he sees a lost object in an area where he can't go because he will become tamei, then he doesn't have to go and get it. And here's our one. Zakein ve'ena lefi kvodo. An elder, that means a Talmid Chacham or a leader of the community or somebody, a Kanaka. And it's beneath his kavod to go and pick up this lost article. Or the example that David gave where the value of the article is not worth the effort and the cost to look after it. Therefore, our pasuk says there are occasions when you don't have to. So, says the Gemara, how can it be that you're going to ask a Kohen to give testimony? Our Mishnah says a Kohen can give testimony, but why do we not invoke the concept of it's beneath his dignity? So that's where we got to last time. Now we're doing new stuff. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, I'll tell you what it is. The situation is Me'id la Melech. The case is against the king, and it is not beneath the dignity of a Kohen Gadol to give testimony against a king. So when the Mishnah says a Kohen Gadol can give testimony in court, it means he can give testimony when the case is against a king, because that's not beneath his dignity. And you're all going to shout at me now, aren't you? What are you going to shout at me, Michael? Anyone? What are you going to shout at me? You're going to say what the Mishnah, what the Gemarah says. Hang on a minute. V'hatanan, we have just learned in the same Mishnah, lo dan v'lo daninoto. A king cannot be brought to court and he cannot give testimony. So if a king cannot be brought to court, how can a Kohen Gadol be asked to give testimony against a king? Can't be, can it? How can it be? Can't be. If a king cannot be brought to court as a defendant, then it can't be that a Kohen Gadol can be asked to give testimony against him, because there can't be a case against the king. So Rav Yosef is in a bit of trouble. And so it says lo ma'id v'lo ma'idinoto. That's what it means. He can't give testimony, and he can't be judged against. So Rabbi Zera comes to the rescue of Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is a bit stuck, and Rabbi Zera says, no. We're not talking about the case is against the king. The case is actually against the prince, against a Ben Melech, Me'id leven Melech. When the Mishnah says that a Kohen Gadol can give testimony, it can't mean he can give testimony against an ordinary person, because that's beneath his dignity. It can't mean that he gives testimony against a king, because we know a king cannot be brought to the court. So it must mean, says Rabbi Zera, that he can give testimony against a prince, against the son of a king. Okay, what's wrong with that? The Gemarah doesn't like that either. Why not?
Well, in certain cases, the son of the king, or certainly the oldest son of the king, will become king himself one day.
The opposite, Jeffrey. The opposite. Until he becomes king, who is he?
He's I suppose, he's the heir apparent.
Okay, but
he's just an ordinary man.
Exactly. I'll ask the question differently. Until he becomes king, what isn't he?
He's not the king.
He's not the king. And so, as Michael says, at the end of the day, a prince is an ordinary fellow. If we think, we don't have to think too far. Apart from Sharon, we're all English here. And so we will all know, won't we, about all the furore about Prince, what's he called? Andrew. Prince Andrew, who is threatened with all sorts of legal action for alleged misdemeanors. Sharon probably also knows that about as well, because the alleged misdemeanors were meant to have taken place in America. Anyway, we do know from British law that the monarch cannot be brought to the court, but a prince, the son of a monarch, certainly can. And that is the case here, apparently. Look what the Gemarah says. Ben Melech Hediot, who, the son of a king, is just an ordinary person. And so what? We go back to what we said right at the beginning. If he's just an ordinary person, then why should a Kohen Gadol be allowed to give testimony against him? He's just an ordinary person. And that would be what?
Below his dignity.
Below the dignity of the Kohen Gadol. So Rabbi Zera has not actually got Rav Yosef out of his dilemma. So he tries again, or we don't know if it's Rebbe Zera. Somebody tries again. Ella, rather, when we have Ella in this situation here, it means, okay, granted, you've got me on that. I'm going to try again. Rather, this is what it means. It doesn't mean Me'id, he gives testimony in the case of a king, because that can't happen. And it doesn't mean he gives testimony in the case of a prince, because a prince is not a king. He's just an ordinary person. So what it means is Me'id bifnei hamelech. He can give testimony in front of the king, meaning that the king is what? The king is one of the judges. So if the king is one of the judges, then it is not beneath the dignity of the Kohen Gadol to come and give testimony in front of the court, the highest court in the land, with the king on the bench. The king's on the bench. It's called the king's bench, isn't it? Well, the king doesn't always sit on the bench, but in our situation, the king is sitting on the bench. And so you will see that an attempt now to get out of our dilemma is that the Kohen Gadol has to give testimony if the king is one of the judges. So, bifnei hamelech, in front of the king. We use that expression in English as well, don't we? We give testimony in front of the court, in front of the judge, before the judge, before the bench, as it were. What's wrong with that? Gemarah doesn't like that either. David, why doesn't the Gemarah like that? Anyone?
It says here the king's not on, isn't one of the judges.
Say that again, Avril.
It says here the king isn't one of the judges.
Well, he's not allowed to be one of the judges. That's the problem. That's the problem. We've got another brisa. We've got another brisa. Here you can see where it is. Tosefta 2:8. V'ha ein moshivim melech b'Sanhedrin. A king cannot be part of the Sanhedrin. The king is not allowed to be part of the Sanhedrin. Why not? Why can a king not be part of the Sanhedrin?
Division of powers.
Okay, explain a bit more, Michael, what you mean by that.
The king is the ruler, but basically he's secular, whereas the Sanhedrin is the religious part. So you separation of state and religion.
Oh, that's very Christian. We don't believe in the separation of state and religion, actually. I mean, we do in the state of Israel to a degree, not very much, but to a degree. But the Jewish way is there is no separation between state and religion. Religion is the law, halachic law. I nearly said Sharia law then, but that wouldn't have been appropriate. But halachic law is the law. We spoke about this, didn't we, a few weeks ago with the halacha police coming to beat you up if you haven't shaken the lulav, remember? So there is no separation between state and law. So that's not the reason why a king cannot be on the Sanhedrin. By the way, can a king be a sole judge? That's just an aside. Can a king be a sole judge?
Yeah.
Why do you say that, Jeffrey?
Well, the wisdom of Solomon.
The judgment of Solomon. Indeed, we have proof that a king can be a sole judge. The story of the judgment of Solomon, everybody knows that story, yes? Where there was two women who each had a baby, and one of the babies sadly died overnight. The next morning, both mothers claim that the surviving baby is theirs. This was before the time where we could do DNA testing. And the mothers come to the court of King Solomon, and each one of them claims that the baby is theirs. And Solomon says, well, I don't know which one it is. Tell you what we'll do. Bring me a sword and we'll cut the baby in half and we'll give you half each. And what happens then
The true
in
mother,
the story?
the true mother says, you mustn't kill the baby, give it to her.
The true mother says, don't kill the baby, give it to the other woman rather than split it in half. And Shlomo Melech says, that's the true mother who has Rachmanos on the child. And he did not go away and consult with his Sanhedrin. He was a sole judge. So, well done, Jeffrey, for remembering that story. But the Braita says that a king cannot be part of a Sanhedrin. Why not? Okay, let's break this down. How does the Sanhedrin work? Let's say you've got a Sanhedrin of, well, it doesn't really matter. Let's say you've got a Sanhedrin of 3 or of 23 or of 71. Doesn't matter which. How does the Sanhedrin work?
They're voted, aren't they?
They have voting, yeah. And what happens before they vote? Anybody ever done jury service here? Anyone ever been on a jury? No, me neither. But I've read enough.
I'm sorry, I'm in a Gemarah shoe.
I've read enough crime novels to know what happens on a jury, and that is that they all go away into a room, don't they? And they discuss it, and then presumably after they've all discussed it ad nauseam, they'll have a vote, and that's what happens in the Sanhedrin. In the Sanhedrin, which effectively is is judge and jury, isn't it? In the Sanhedrin, the 3 members or the 23 members or the 71 members will all go away and discuss it, and presumably there'll be a chairman of the Sanhedrin, and the chairman will go around the table and say, right, Judge A, what do you think? Judge B, what do you think? Judge C, what do you think? Etc. And everybody will give their opinion, and then some people will be persuaded by somebody else's argument and change their view, and then they'll have a discussion, and they'll say, well, but have you thought of this, and have you thought of that, and back and forth, and eventually they'll take a vote. Now, imagine you've got a king on the Sanhedrin, and the king says guilty or not guilty. What's going to happen with the other judges?
Nobody wants
Follow
to
the king.
They're all going to agree with the king, aren't they?
Agree.
Nobody's going to want to disagree with the king. So, how could you get around that?
Secret voting.
Well, yeah, secret voting, yes, but you've still got to have the discussion. You're not going to, when the king says, well, I think he's guilty because A, B, C, if you're another judge, you're not going to want to say, well, I think you're wrong, king. I think he's not guilty because of X, Y, Z. So how could you get around that problem? You could get around the problem very simply.
Don't allow the king to be on the
Okay,
jury.
that's where we end up. But there's another solution. Come on, think laterally. When will the king give his opinion?
Give the king his opinion last.
Yes, well done, Michael. If you make the king give his opinion last, then nobody is going to then be fearful that they will give a different opinion to the king, because they don't know what the king's opinion is until right at the end. So you could get away with it. You could have the king on a Sanhedrin and just have a situation where the king gives his evidence, or his opinion, not his evidence, gives his opinion last. And then you could have your secret votes, but by that time you'd already know, wouldn't you? But you've still really got the problem, because if the king says guilty and you don't agree with him and you vote against what the king says, you've still gone against the king, even though you will have already expressed your opinion. So it's still a bit of a problem. It's less of a problem, but it is a solution that is suggested by the Gemarah, not here, somewhere else in the Brisa, that in order, if you're going to have a king on a panel of judges, on a Sanhedrin, he has to give his opinion last. What is the problem with that, of the king giving his opinion last? Well, it's not kavod, is it? It's not kavod to make the king give his opinion last. The king is the most important person. He must give his opinion first. And therefore, you've still got the same problem, because everyone is then going to say, oh, yes, king, you're right. Yes, king, you're right, even though they might not think so. So the Brisa says that for that reason, we do not allow a king to be seated on a Sanhedrin. He can judge on his own, but he cannot be part of a Sanhedrin. It can't mean what the Eloh says, what the rather is. It can't mean that when a Kohen Gadol is allowed to give testimony, it's when one of the judges is the king, because that can't be. A judge is not allowed to sit on a Sanhedrin. It could be if the judge is on his own, but that's not what the Gemarah likes to say. So what he says is, the Gemarah then explains a different opinion of Rav Yosef. Mishum yekara to Kohen Gadol ata v'yatev. It turns it on its head. I have to say, I don't get the logic of this. To me, it's not quite right. But the Gemarah says that due to the fact that the Kohen Gadol is giving evidence, the king comes to court as an observer. Now that's backwards to me. We're trying to show a situation where a Kohen Gadol can give evidence. And we're saying that it's when a king comes to the court as an observer because he's giving evidence. Well, that doesn't make sense. That's not logical. Because when he comes to give evidence, how do we know the king's going to come?
I thought it was because that was the device. I assumed it meant it was a device in a particular situation to enable the high priest to give evidence. The device was that the king came. So what in that situation,
what you're saying is you force the king to come to court. You can't force the king to come to court.
Not force him to come, but there's some convention established.
Okay, so
in exceptional circumstances.
It's not quite like you're saying, and it's not quite like I'm saying. I'm saying it's a bit upside down to say that the Kohen Gadol can give evidence because if he's giving evidence, the king will come to court because of his honor. Well, why should the king bother to go to court just because the Kohen Gadol is giving evidence? What's it got to do with the king? Whether the Kohen Gadol is giving evidence or not.
It might be a very important case.
When might the king go to court as an observer?
A very important case.
A very important case. Very important. Very important to whom, Michael?
To the country, to the king.
Ah, to the king. And what might that be? A very important case to the king.
Concerning his son.
His son. Yes. Prince Andrew is in the dock and King Charles comes to hear the evidence. He sits in the visitors' gallery as an observer and he wants to hear the evidence against his son. So we go back to the scenario of Rabbi Zera and we what's the word? We do Tchiat HaMeitim. We revive the dead situation that Rav Zera had, which we said it was he was testifying, this Kohen Gadol was testifying against the prince. And we said, no, it can't be that because the prince is just a prince, he's not a king. But if the king is there as an observer, then it is no longer beneath the dignity of the Kohen Gadol to give evidence. And so at this point, the Gemarah says the case we're talking about, where a Kohen Gadol can give evidence is when the case is against a prince. We would expect the king to come to the court because he's a very interested party. He wants to know what's going to happen to his son. And if the king is there in the court, it is no longer appropriate for the Kohen Gadol to say, I'm not coming to give evidence because it's beneath my dignity. If the king is there, it's no longer beneath his dignity. So let's have a look what the actual Gemarah says. Mishum Yikarat Kohen Gadol, because of the fact that the Kohen Gadol is coming to give evidence, Ata Vayatev. He comes, the king comes, and he sits as one of the judges. Va'azil uma'ainina le anan bedine. And they hear his testimony. The king hears the testimony of the Kohen Gadol, anan bedine, and then he goes out. Azil uma'ainine. He rises and goes, and the judges then deliberate about the case. Let's have a look over here in the notes here. A king is not seated on the Sanhedrin. The Gemarah explains that a king is not seated on the Sanhedrin because there's a concern that the other judges will disagree with him, but keep silent because of the Torah's prohibition against contradicting a king, like we said. Early commentaries note that this concern should bar the king from judging only if he states his opinion on the matter before the other judges do so, but not if he states his opinion last. Yet, that arrangement was never considered because it would not befit the king's stature for others to open the deliberations in his presence, and it would be disrespectful for lesser judges to speak while he is silent. Now, I'm going to just go down so you can't see the rest of that note. Michael Krauss, don't read it, okay? Because I'm going to ask those of you who attend the Tanakh Shir, which is Michael and Jeffrey and David. I don't know about Avril. Do you come to the Tanakh Shir? Avril, not sure. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You will all know, because you will remember every single word of everything that we've ever learnt in the Tanakh Shir. You will know that we have a case where the king speaks last in a situation like this. You'll never get it. It's not a fair question because I didn't get it either, and I was the one that learned it. So I'll tell you. Well, I'll show you actually. I'll show you. It's the story, our lovely story of Naval. Remember Naval? Michael knows who Naval is, don't you, Michael?
You asked me yesterday as well. Was it yesterday? Yeah.
It was on Shabbat, yes.
On Shabbat, yeah.
No, it wasn't. It was on the Chag. It was on Chag.
Yeah.
Yes, Naval was the husband of
Abigail.
Abigail. And Naval did something bad to David, didn't give him his men their due recompense. And David decided what? He was going to
kill him.
Kill the lot
All of them.
Kill the lot of them. So have a look at verse 13 on the screen, Jeffrey, for us, please. Put your glasses back on, verse 13.
David said to his men, gird each man his sword. And they girded each man his sword, and David too girded his sword. And they went up after David, about 400 men, and 200 stayed with the luggage.
Okay, so there they want to say in this Gemarah that David told the men to gird their swords, and then he too girded his sword. Our Gemarah wants to say, yeah, that's why you'd never get it, because it's very, very schwach. Let's go back to the Gemarah. Let's go back to the note here. The Gemarah does state that King David spoke last in the judication of the case of Naval, who was charged with sedition, C36A. We have to it'll take us at this rate another 4.5 years to get to 36A because we're on 18B at the moment. So I'm not going to switch over to 36A, but I'll remind you in 4.5 years' time, please God, by which time I'll be 70, please God, that the Gemarah tells us that King David spoke last in the case of Naval, and he refers us to the pasuk that Jeffrey's just read. But since the case specifically addressed a challenge to the king's honor, perhaps it fit him to speak last, says Rabbeinu Yonah. Alternatively, since in capital cases adjudication always begins from the least important judge, the king would experience no disgrace in speaking last, says the Ram. I think that's all a bit schwach, to be honest, but it was interesting only because it referred to the Tanakh story that we are all so very familiar with.
Did he actually speak last, or did he just gird his sword last?
He girded his sword. He didn't speak last, according to the pasuk. Have a look
Yes,
at
he
the
just
pasuk
girded
there.
his sword last.
There's the pasuk.
Yeah.
David said to his men, when I was preparing this shiur earlier on, I was looking all around here for where the men spoke and then David spoke, and I didn't find it. I didn't have time, to be honest, to jump to 36a to have a look at it because I got waylaid in shul this morning by somebody who wanted to have a chat with me, which took an hour. So that's ate into my preparation time for this morning. So I never had a chance to jump to 36a to see exactly what they say. But I did look around the psukim and I couldn't find it. And of course, he refers us to this specific pasuk of 13, where it doesn't say anything about him speaking last. But we'll have to wait for 36a. Maybe I'll have a look at it during the week. Perhaps if somebody reminds me, we'll talk about it at the beginning of next week's shiur. So let's go back to the Gemarah. We've now got to the situation where the Mishnah says a Kohen Gadol can give testimony, and we've narrowed it down to a very specific case where the Kohen Gadol can give testimony, which is he can give testimony when the case is against the king's son and the king is present either as part of the Sanhedrin, if it's a situation where he accepts the scenario where he will speak last, or where he is an observer, an interested observer in the case. So this is the problem that we have with the Mishnah. This is why the Gemarah had to be written, if you like. As we know, the Mishnah was arranged and edited by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi around about 200. And it was done so because we were worried that all the halachot would get forgotten if it wasn't written down, because we no longer had a Sanhedrin working in the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash had been destroyed 130 years earlier. And we were beginning to forget what the actual halacha was. So Rabbi Yehuda wrote it down, but he wrote it down in shorthand form. 300 years later, they don't know what the shorthand meant, right? I don't know about you, but it doesn't take me 300 years not to be able to understand my shorthand. When I'm doing my work, my medico-legal work, I write myself notes as I'm going along, and then when I come to dictate it, first of all, I can't even read what I've written. That's the first problem I've got. And then when I manage to decipher what I've actually written, it doesn't always make sense, and I have to go back and look again and see what I really meant. And that's only about 5 or 6 hours later. So you can imagine that 300 years later, it's not surprising that the rabbis of the Gemarah time, 500-600 CE, did not know exactly what the Mishnah was referring to when it said a Kohen Gadol can give testimony. It didn't understand it. And that's what we've just done. We've just done, if you like, the most classic piece of Gemarah. It takes a Mishnah, and which on the face of it seems very straightforward. A Kohen Gadol can give testimony. And as it were, the Gemarah scratches its head, its combined head, and says, I don't understand. How can it be that a Kohen Gadol can give testimony. It's beneath his dignity. We've got a pastor that tells us that. And then, so Rav Yosef says, oh, I know what Rav Yehuda Hanassi meant when he said that. He meant he could give testimony when it's not beneath his dignity against a king. And then they say, no, don't be daft, Rav Yosef. He can't amend that because we know a king can't be brought, a case can't be brought against a king. Rabbi Zera pipes up and says, oh, he must have meant against a son of a king. Gemarah, the rest of the rabbis say, nah, don't be silly, can't mean that. And you can see how this Gemarah develops. You can almost picture in your mind's eye the scenario of what's going on in the Gemarah. And then, of course, this all got written down in the form of the Gemarah. So I remember when I first learned Gemarah at age 10, I didn't have the intellectual capacity or the maturity or the interest, to be honest, or the decent teacher, I'm also honest, to understand what this process was all about. To me, it was just a bunch of Aramaic words, which was irrelevant to me in, 1969 when I was 10 years old. It was irrelevant. And that's why you shouldn't teach Gemarah to 10-year-olds, because it put you off. And it put me off for a very long time until I got the maturity to understand what this process was. And once you understand what the process is, how the Mishnah came about and how the Gemarah came about, and this last few lines, how many lines is it? Even in the Steinsaltz split up nicely. We're only talking about 10 lines here, 10 or 15 lines. It's a beautiful example of a historical process that's gone on. And once you understand that, you understand the depth of what we're doing here. And it doesn't matter that it's not relevant to us in 2024. We don't have a Kohen Gadol, we don't have a king. It's the intellectual process. It's the development of halakha. It's the way our whole religion developed over the centuries, which is so fascinating and which is so relevant. So I just think that this was such a beautiful piece of Gemarah, not because it's so particularly relevant, but because you can picture in your mind's eye all the rabbis of the Gemarah sitting around and we, by the way, on Shabbat, on Chag, towards the end of Chag, we were struggling for things to keep the kids occupied with. And so we played a game of Chinese whispers, where we got my 7-year-old granddaughter to whisper something in the ear of her mother, who whispered it into the ear of my 5-year-old granddaughter, who whispered it into the ear of my wife, who whispered it into somebody, and then into my ear. And we went through the whole room and we saw that it didn't come out the way it started. That's Chinese whispers. I'm sure you've all heard of that. Do you know, by the way, I'll teach you a bit of modern Hebrew now. Do you know what Chinese whispers is called in Hebrew? Anybody? You'll love it when I tell you. It's not called Chinese whispers. Do you know, David? It's called telephone shavul, a broken telephone. I think that's great. Anyway, so that was just 6 or 7 people in a room. You can imagine how the Chinese whispers got distorted over 300 years. And that's why we have the Gemarah. So we finished that piece of Gemarah now, but we haven't quite finished it, because the Gemarah is now, we've got a little S sign, which means we're starting a new topic, as it were. But it's not quite a new topic, because we've got the word gufa. Gufa. What does that mean? What's the word guf mean? What's a guf?
Body.
A body. That's right. Unfortunately, we are used to the word gufa, not with an aleph at the end, but with a hey at the end. What's gufa with a hey on the end? Guf is a body. What's a gufa?
Dead one.
A dead one. Yeah, a dead body, a corpse. And we are praying as part of our prayers now. We have a prayer that's asking for the gufot to be returned, the corpses of those who are still in captivity. So gufa means a corpse, guf means a body, So what's this got to do with anything here? Are we talking about dead bodies or live bodies? No, we're not. What does the word gufa mean here in Gemarah language? Anyone? David, what does gufa mean when it's in the Gemarah? You've muted, David.
The crux of the matter.
Say again.
The crux of the matter.
Yeah, it means we are returning to the body of the Braita, gufa. It says in the body of the Braita, what does it say? Ein moshivim melech b'Sanhedrin, velo melech v'Kohen Gadol be'ibur shana. So, gufa means we're returning to the crux of the matter, as David said. That's a very good way of explaining that word. We're going back to the crux of the matter. The Braita said a king cannot sit in a Sanhedrin, and what's more, a king and a Kohen Gadol cannot sit on a court be'ibur shana. What's ibur shana? You should all know this. We did this about a year ago. What's ibur shana? What is an isha mu'uberet? Anyone know? What's an isha mu'uberet? An isha mu'uberet is a pregnant woman. What is a shana mu'uberet? What's a shana?
Year.
So what's a shana mu'uberet, Michael?
A year with an extra month.
Yes, a pregnant year. A year with an extra month. What is a pregnant woman? It's a woman with an extra bit, isn't it? With a pregnancy. So a shana mu'uberet is a year with an extra bit. And that's how you say a leap year in Hebrew. In Hebrew, the word for leap year is not shana mekutzefet, which means to jump. It's shana mu'uberet, a pregnant year. So ibur shana is the pregnancy of the year. What's the pregnancy of the year? The addition of the extra month. Now, you remember way back when, don't you, when we learned this, that there were lots of different reasons why the Sanhedrin would make an extra month. Just to test your memory, you've got a 1 in 3 chance here. How many judges did it take to make the Shana Mu'uberet? Go on, have a guess.
23.
No. Have another guess, Michael.
70.
70. 71. 71. Okay, 71. Okay, so we're told here that the Kohen Gadol and the king cannot be on the court for pregnancying the year, for making a leap year. Why not? Why not? Okay, this is now testing you. Don't look in the don't look in any of the notes. I'll take them off the screen so nobody can cheat. Why? Let's start with a king. Let's see how good your lateral thinking is. I'll be dead impressed if you laterally think this one. Why is a king not allowed to be on the court that intercalates a year, that makes a leap year?
Taxes.
Oh, that's good. Go on. Taxes.
Because he's allowed so much tax in a year, and therefore he might not want to inculcate the year because then he'd get his tax money in quicker.
Very good, Michael. That is not the reason they gave, but it would be a very valid reason, because you would pay tax on a yearly basis, and so you would be paying 12 months tax on a 13-month year, and so you would say, "Oh, I've got a month's free." And the king would say, "Drat, I've lost a month's tax. That would be a very, very good reason. It's not the reason the Gemarah gives, but I would definitely agree with you on that. The reason that the Gemarah gives is the opposite. See if you can work that out. Why might the king want to intercalate a year? You told me why he might not want to. Why might he want to? Why might he have a vested interest?
He'd be extending his reign, his power.
He'd be extending his reign. Well, not really. His reigns until he's dead. So it doesn't really matter whether you die in Adar Sheni or you die in Nisan. You die. Any thoughts as to why he might want to extend the year? And it's the flip side of what Michael says. Shall I tell you? Well, the army was paid on a yearly basis. And so the king in a leap year gets 13 months service out of his soldiers for 12 months pay. And so therefore, he might have a vested interest in extending the year. I actually think that Michael's reason is better, because he's going to probably lose out on the taxes more than he would gain on the pay. However, the answer might be that tax is paid on a monthly basis, not a yearly basis. And so if you earn, let's say, 10,000 shekels a month, then in a leap year, you would pay tax on 130,000 shekels, not 120,000. I'm guessing that that's the reason, because otherwise I think they would have given the reason that you said. But yeah, I'm extremely impressed with your lateral thinking, Michael. Well done. Right. So a king cannot be on the court who extends the, where am I? Have I gone too far now? Yeah. A king cannot be on a court which extends the year because of vested interest. We can't have vested interest in a court. What about a Kohen Gadol? What's the vested interest in a Kohen Gadol? I'll take it off so you can't cheat. What vested interest has the Kohen Gadol got in either extending the year or not extending the year? You'll never get this in a million years unless you've read on. So I'll tell you. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur has to do what?
Going to the whole Kadosh Kadoshim.
He does. And what does he have to do before that?
Change his clothes.
Okay. And what does he have to do after he's changed it, or before, in the middle of changing his clothes?
He's supposed to have done mikvah as well.
He has to go in the mikveh. And the mikveh was not a all singing, all dancing ladies' mikveh with lovely bathrooms and heated pools. It was probably something like the Lubavitch mikveh on Singleton Road, which at the end of Yom Kippur had new life forms in it. Started off clear water and it came out like soup. So you had to make sure you went to the mikveh very early on Erev Yom Kippur if you didn't want to get some very nasty disease. So the mikveh was not heated. And so what happens if you have a leap year? Yom Kippur. Oh, by the way, how many times does he go in the mikveh on Yom Kippur?
He would have gone in every time before each service. So
how many times in the day?
I would say 3.
Jeffrey says 3. Any advance on 3? Why'd you say 3, Jeffrey?
Well, because we daven 3 services a day. Actually, maybe it's 4. It would be 4 on maybe on Yom Kippur.
Go on, keep going. How many tefillahs do we do on Yom Kippur?
5.
5. Which of the 5?
Kol Nidre with Mariv,
That's 1.
Chris, Musaf, Mincha, and Ne'ilah.
Yeah, 5. We do 5 tefillah. So would you like to re-guess, Jeffrey?
I'm sorry, re-guess?
Yeah, you said 3. Would you like to have another guess now?
Well, you said in the day, and I know Kol Nidre, if you like, or Mariv is counted as the next day, but I thought it was actually in the day of the
Okay,
daylight
so Jeffrey's
time.
sticking with 4. Anybody else want to guess? It's 5. Okay, the Kohen Gadol goes in the mikveh 5 times. Tried to help you out there, Jeffrey. You weren't having it.
Well, no, no, but you
I
did
don't know
say
if
on
it's to
the
do with the
day.
5 different prayers, but possibly is. But the Kohen Gadol goes in the mikveh 5 times on Yom Kippur. Now, if we have a leap year, Yom Kippur is
Very cold.
a month later. And the Kohen Gadol was a bit of a softie. He wasn't somebody that, was going to jump in the mikveh of the Alter Rebbe in Sfat. Was it the Alter? No, it was the Alter. No, whose mikveh was it? Baal Shem Tov's mikveh in Sfat. Anybody been to that? Very, very cold. Anyway, the mikveh for the Kohen Gadol was much colder, apparently, a month later. And so therefore, the Kohen Gadol might not want to go in the mikveh a month later, and therefore he's also got a vested interest, and therefore he cannot be on the court which decides to extend the year. So, and we're going to stop there because we're out of time. But let's just finish because actually we've got a little bit over here that tells us something slightly different. Melech b'Sanhedrin. Why can't we have a king on the Sanhedrin? And we've already said this. Diktiv, as we have written, Lo Ta'aneh al Riv. There's a pasuk in Shmot, which we actually laned. When did we lane this? We laned this on Sunday, I think, didn't we, David? Lo Ta'aneh al Riv, I think we did. Or was it on Monday? No, it wasn't on Monday. Monday was B'Shalach. So I think this was the laning for Sunday. I'll just take
Friday.
Friday, okay. Friday. There you are. Lo Ta'aneh al Riv. Here we go. You shall not. There it is. On the screen. Verse 2, Jeffrey, on the screen.
You shall not follow the majority for evil, and you shall not respond concerning a lawsuit to follow many to pervert justice.
Lo Ta'aneh al Riv. Do not turn to Riv. Riv means a argument. But what the Gemarah says here is Lo Ta'aneh al Riv, Lo Ta'aneh al Rav. Riv is normally spelt with a yud in it. Can you see where my pointer is? Normally you would spell Riv, meaning quarrel or argument, with a yud. It's not got a yud in it. So the Gemarah says you could read that as Lo Ta'aneh al Rav. Do not answer back. In other words, do not contradict Rav, the master. Who is the master? The king. So that's why we can't have a king on the Sanhedrin, because of what we said earlier, that the other judges would not be allowed to disagree because of this interpretation of that pasuk. Let's just finish this last 2 lines. Lo melech b'Kohen Gadol be'ibur shana. The melech and the Kohen Gadol cannot be on the panel that adjudicates the intercalation of a year. Well, why? Melech mishum afsanya. The king, because of the matter of the sustenance of the soldiers, like I said, and Kohen Gadol mishum tzina, and the high priest because of tzina, which means cold, because he does not want to go walking barefoot on the floor of the temple and jumping into the mikveh in the cold autumn. So what we learn from this is a very simple and important principle which applies to every court in every proper country, and that is a judge who has a vested interest in the outcome of the case has to withdraw from the case. Right, Avril?
Yeah, recuse.
I'm sure that is enshrined in some fancy statute in English law, and I'm sure it is in American law, and in every proper country, a judge who has a vested interest cannot sit on the adjudicating panel. So
What would
we have done, let's just summarize what we've done so far today. We did a lot today. We learned a beautiful piece of Gemarah which explains how the Gemarah works, trying to explain a Mishnah that seems difficult to understand. We had all sorts of different reasons how a Kohen Gadol could give testimony, and we ended up with the case that he can give testimony against a prince when the king is there. And we learned that a king cannot be on a regular Sanhedrin because lo ta'aneh al Rav, you can't answer him back, you can't disagree with the king. And we learned that Kohen Gadol and a king cannot be on a panel to intercalate the year because of vested interest. Okay, any questions on what we did today?
I assume the high priest wouldn't have wanted to go into the Serpentine on Boxing Day.
No, I guess not. I guess not. Don't fancy that either. But yeah, only Mr. Goyim do that, Michael. No.
Or the Mosque of a River on New Year's Day.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Those are not for Yiddish about that, and definitely not for the Kohen Gadol. Any other questions or comments on today's thing? Okay, very good. I will stop the recording and tell you a couple of things. Hang on a minute.